Okay, I would like to call to order this special board meeting for the Board of Education, East Maine School District 63, which is meeting virtually due to the enactment of Senate Bill 2135. The provision of the Open Meetings Act have been amended to include provisions for emergency situations such as COVID-19. Okay, roll call, please.
Ms. Petrowski?
Here.
Ms. Sack?
Here.
Ms. Anderson?
Here.
Mr. Gluskin?
Here.
Ms. Urban?
Here.
Mr. Simmons?
Here.
Ms. Brooke?
Here. Okay. The first item is reading some public comments. So again, due to the enactment of Senate Bill 2135, the provisions of the Open Meetings Act have been amended to include provisions for emergency situations such as COVID. If you wish to ask or make a comment, a link was provided prior to the meeting. We have received a couple of comments that I will read so that it is on the record. Board members, you have all should have received an email from one of our parents from Apollo School and Mr. Lee. So I certainly hope, I'm sure I mispronounced your name. Please forgive me. But I would like to go ahead and read that. So, to the board, thank you first for your, I'm sorry, my screen just did something weird. Sorry. Okay. Thank you for your service in serving our school board. This is often a thankless service, but especially during these times. Thank you for your time away from your family and friends to help our students. I know that the CDC director just released a statement 2 days ago stating how important it is for students to return to some in-person schooling in an actual school. He cited an article that can be found on the CDC website. I also know our great Maine Niles Library has opened and other public swimming pools have opened for our community like Glenview and Skokie. I also visited daycare centers to speak to daycare directors, and they have mentioned that they have no new cases of COVID-19 in their eight-week-old infants to 4-year-old children. Please feel free to visit daycares in our community to see how they are safely run, along with summer camps like Apache and Evanston. I know there may be some fears amongst teachers, but they are considered essential workers, and perhaps those who can't teach in person due to health conditions can be assigned students who will learn remotely with them. But for parents like myself and many others who have begun to work, please allow our students to return to school to have some in-person learning. The hybrid model explained in the survey seemed most workable. There needs to be some person-to-person contact with the children, peers, and teachers. Students are suffering emotionally, academically, and socially. Please help our students. Thank you to each of you again for your service, and I know there's not a perfect plan, but we must at least try to have our students attend school partially instead of sitting on a tablet screen. Thank you for your time and reading my ideas and comments, a proud parent of 3 at Apollo School. So definitely we want to thank Mr. Liesi for his comment. And then we did receive a comment from a parent as well. Hello, I've heard of surrounding districts that will be holding in-person school come fall 2020. And because COVID doesn't allow students to congregate, they will not be practicing fire drills, tornado drills, and shooter drills. If District 63 has in-person school, will they be practicing these drills? If not, how can we assure that if these emergency situations arise, that our children know what to do? And this was submitted by Jacqueline Neeson, and we will be responding to her separately. We do have the availability of on our website for you to post additional questions, especially if you are watching this and you have questions for us. Dr. Clay will be putting together a frequently asked question little module, if you will, to hopefully answer everybody's question. Okay. Debbie, have we received anything else?
We did. We received a comment or a question from Mr. Ali, one of our parents. Since most of the teachers are opting for distance learning, why don't we do distance learning for trimester 1 and look at therapeutic and vaccine status in October 2020 to make an informed decision? And that's all that I have.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and if we continue to receive comments, as I said, we will go ahead and just include them in a frequently asked question presentation that Dr. Clay will be putting together, and that will be submitted to everyone. All right, and again, you can find that information on our website. Okay, so why don't we just begin for the purpose of our meeting this evening? Dr.
Okay.
Clay, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. I'll pull up the presentation here. Okay, so tonight's presentation is our proposal for starting the 2020-2021 school year. My hope is that by the time we're done here tonight, that we will have a pretty clear direction from the board as to which way we will go. Even though the final approval is until August 6th, we would like to be able to give parents as much heads up as to which way we're going as possible, and also our staff. So tonight, here's the agenda of our presentation. Lots of things to cover. We're going to cover the process we've gone through. We're going to look at the information that we're using to make our decisions and that we will continue to use in the future. And then we'll get into the details of our proposal, how we're hoping to start school, what our remote learning will look like, what our hybrid model will look like, etc. So first of all, we started this process with what was most important to us. And these three circles on this slide really are what we talked about in pretty much every planning meeting that we've done, and trying to figure out which way to go, what's the safest thing for our students and our staff. And we really do talk frequently about what are the needs of our families. So it's student and staff safety, definitely quality instruction and learning, and the needs of our families. So the plan development we did with a steering committee we started. That's the leadership team. You can see the names here. We had a parent from each school. We had many administrators. We had 2 board members. So this group really did take the lead. And from here, then there are subcommittees that are working on details of the plan. So thank you to everybody who's involved in this process. All right, so this slide's talking about the guidance that we're using to lead us through this process. We really depend heavily on the Illinois State Board of Education and also the Illinois Department of Public Health. So here are some of their requirements for in-person learning. We're required to use personal protective equipment, including face coverings. We can't have more than 50 individuals in any gathering. That includes classrooms, playgrounds, buses, etc. And requiring social distancing as much as possible everywhere that we would be, in the classroom, on playgrounds, buses, etc. Also, we would require parents to self-certify that their children are free of symptoms before entering school buildings each day. We require an increase in school-wide cleaning and disinfection, and have the capacity to fully transition to remote learning in the event of a resurgence of the virus. So those are our overarching guidelines. And then there are statistics and metrics that we use from IDPH and Cook County Department of Health. So looking at the caseloads, the positivity rates, hospitalizations, all the things that we've seen on the news over and over again for the last several months. And then we, from July 9th to July 15th, we had a parent survey open to find out how parents were feeling about opening school again. One thing to point out before we talk about this is that this was a couple weeks ago or so, so parent feedback may be different today, and it would probably be different a month from now. So this first slide for the parent survey is about the comfort level that people have for sending their kids back to school, in person and learning. So if you can look on this, the orange section is the group of people who are very uncomfortable sending their children back. So that's about 40% of our parents who were feeling that way. 27%, the light blue area, somewhat uncomfortable. And only 10%, 10.4% feel very comfortable about sending their kids back to school. This one is, will you actually send your child back to school if we go to in-person learning? And you'll see here that 23.5% just plain say no, they're not sending their children back to school. And that is that's pretty much in line with other districts. Everybody's saying it's somewhere between 20 and 25% for most of them. But the interesting part here is that we have a large group, 35%, who are saying maybe. So we don't know which way they'll go. I suspect they're still watching to see what we come up with for a plan and how the virus continues to present itself in our community. And then we have just 23.5% who say they will definitely send their kids back to school, or at least they did a couple weeks ago. And then an important thing to notice is that of the 1,100 comments we had, hundreds of those respondents expressed a high level of skepticism that we could actually do this safely. And most of them were referring to having children keep their masks on, making sure children don't share their masks, that they stay away from each other even though they're excited to be together again. So lots of people are wondering how we could possibly do that. And many noted that their maybe response depends on what happens, and that could shift to a no in the future. We asked if they would need childcare if we go to a hybrid model where the part of the day would be in and part of the day might be out, or every other day. And so 25% of them said they would need childcare of some sort. We didn't ask if they would use our expanded learning or what they would do, but 25% said they would need some assistance with that. Then we also had a staff survey open from July 9th through the 17th. We had about 405 responses, which is almost 100% of our employees. So the chart on the left shows just the breakdown of our employees who responded. And on the right, we just basically asked our staff if they would be able to return to work if we came back into the buildings. Almost 83% said yes, they could return to work. And 17% reported that there was a reason that they couldn't return, and those were mostly about personal medical reasons for them. So now we get to our proposal. And before I talk about what's on this slide and our proposal, I want to bring up something that's been in the papers and on the news lately, is about teacher unions and teachers lobbying to go virtual. And I just want the board to know, and all of our community to know, that nobody on our staff has lobbied me or our team to go remote. They have been very cooperative, very respectful. The union has not approached me about going one way or the other. What I'm about to propose to you is how I and my team believe is the most safe way that we can reopen our schools this year. I want to compliment our staff on their patience as this situation just keeps changing from day to day. And I have received lots of thank yous for proposing what I'm going to propose tonight, but they did not lobby me for this. So what we're proposing is that on the first day of school, August 20th, we start with a remote learning plan. The children will be learning, and we are calling it Remote Learning 2.0 because, as you'll see in a few slides, we have really completely changed the way we're going to do remote learning, and it will be much more engaging and time-consuming for the kids and the teachers too. but I think you'll find that it's greatly improved. Our current plan then would be that on September 29th, we'd return to in-person learning through a hybrid learning model, and that would be only if it's safe and appropriate. So we'd be using all those metrics to see if it's at that time a safe point in time to come back into the schools. Throughout this, there would be a fully remote option for all those parents who said under no circumstances are they going to send their children to school. And then moving forward, we have to be prepared, and we are, to pivot back and forth between being in person and out, because we, most of us believe that with this virus, that there's going to be outbreaks, there's going to be positive cases where we're going to have to close classrooms or schools. And so we need to be very well prepared for that. So why begin remotely? Excuse me. So first of all, the one thing that I've had in the back of my mind for quite a while now, as we've been talking about opening schools, is the fact is the situation is quite a bit worse now than it was when we first closed schools in the middle of March. Our statewide average of cases in March was 480. Now we're averaging around 1,400 cases per day. So there's a lot to be worried about as far as where the numbers are going. And we know that as the rest of the country is surging out of control in a lot of areas, there's no boundary that's going to stop that from coming toward us unless we're really, really careful. It also gives us additional time to create a safe in-person learning environment. There are lots of things that we still need to do. We can get it done in time to open in person, but the more time we can take to really do it carefully, the better. It would give students a chance to begin building relationships with teachers while staying safely at home. One of the things that we kept trying to imagine was bringing kids in on August 20th and having them meet new people, their new teacher, their new friends, at the same time being told how to wear a mask, how to stay away from each other, how to wash their hands every so often, and all the things that they're going to have to be taught how to be in school safely. We felt that we could do a better job of building relationships with our kids remotely at that point. And then we could focus on the actual learning, and then also use that time remotely to help prepare the kids for what it's going to be like when they come back to school. There could be practice sessions on camera with the little ones about how to put their mask on and how to take it back off and those kinds of things. And another big one too is I think beginning remotely helps us to possibly reduce the likelihood of frequent school closures and reopenings. If we wait until start remotely and then watch to see what's going to happen, we may avoid what looks like is on its way, and which is a resurgence for us. And one of the things that I have a couple things that lead me to feel that way. One thing, I know of a school in Lake County that had a summer school that they opened. It was just 60 people were involved in the summer school. And in the first 6 days, they had to close down classrooms, well, at least one classroom every day because of positive cases, either among their children or their teachers. So it is happening in places. And then also, if you think about all the professional sports that we've been reading about in the paper and watching on the news, even Major League Baseball, with all their resources, all their availability of testing, the fact that they're doing a lot of their stuff outdoors, they are still having issues with outbreaks of COVID among their players. And I think we all know the story of Lake Zurich and their sports camp, which was a major outbreak. And their staff had to make 400 contact tracing calls just to try to figure out who it needed to isolate in that situation. So those are some of the reasons why we believe starting out remotely would be beneficial. So now I'm going to let Aaron Roberson from the Teaching and Learning Department to explain the next several slides.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Clay. So the next few slides will kind of summarize our proposal for what remote learning will look like this school year. And to draw the distinction from last spring, it's now called 63 Online. The plan is to have some incremental changes that will make remote learning look much more like school as we traditionally know it. So these changes come largely from the new guidance from the Illinois State Board of Education, but also from the input from administrators, teachers, staff, students, and our families. So one big change on this slide is the amount of learning time, which is increased to 5 hours per day and 2.5 hours per pre-K class because they attend either in the morning or the afternoon for students in grades kindergarten through 8th grade. This shift came largely from the Illinois State Board of Education's new guidance. Last spring, the guidance recommended much less time for learning, especially at younger grade levels. So 5 hours of learning time is pretty close to the amount of learning time during a typical school day. And supports will continue to be in place during these hours for students with individualized education plans, or IEPs, and emerging bilinguals, which used to be referred to as English learners. Next slide, Dr. Clay. Okay. So with 5 hours of daily learning time in mind, this picture shows that last spring, since we shifted to e-learning in just a few days, our focus largely was on reviewing key skills, especially at our younger grade levels where students would need more support to learn new information. So really, so teachers and staff and students and parents were jolted into an unknown environment, and we did our best to really figure that out all together. Now for our 63 online proposal this fall, remote learning will focus largely on new learning and the academic standards for each grade level, similar to what we would normally do during typical school-based instruction. So while reviewing and revisiting past learning is always a part of instruction, our focus this fall would be largely on moving students forward with new learning. Next slide. To facilitate instruction remotely, our instructional approach this time around will be to use a combination of 1, synchronous instruction or live teaching, 2, asynchronous instruction, which is pre-recorded that can be watched at any time, and 3, independent learning. With embedded student choice and novelty to continue to engage our students remotely. Now, again, to parallel typical instruction as much as possible, synchronous or live instruction by teachers this time around will be the biggest chunk of each student's remote learning day. The proposal is for teachers to facilitate live instruction to students through whole class instruction, small group, and through one-to-one instruction. Next slide. Since e-learning happened so quickly last school year, the guidance from the Illinois State Board of Education was minimal on grading and providing report cards. Here in District 63, we made a local decision to focus on feedback instead of grades and report cards, since everyone was truly learning how to navigate this new normal. For this fall, however, we will continue providing ongoing feedback to students, but we will also shift back to providing students with grades and report cards. Seeing that our 63 online proposal encompasses a longer learning day and more synchronous instruction or live instruction, we will be more readily able to provide grades and report cards to students and families. Next slide. So our goal last spring was to communicate important information, so about e-learning or meal pickup, etc., as often as possible. Survey feedback from parents and students shared that the communication was overwhelming at times, meaning they were getting so many pieces that it was kind of hard to balance it all. And for some of our students at Gemini especially, navigating information from multiple teachers was challenging. So our goal this time around is to communicate to families with a less is more approach, and how we facilitate 63 online learning activities will be a big piece of that. School-wide organizers will be a one-stop shop for students and parents to access learning from all teachers, and will also include some additional options. options outside what is facilitated by teachers for students that want supplemental enrichment options. We implemented this at Gemini last year, a few weeks into e-learning, and it was a more successful approach to communicating how students can work through their e-learning activities. Next slide. And finally, those are kind of the big changes that we would propose for remote learning this fall. And I think these pictures say it best. Last spring, we were definitely building the plane as we flew it, much like everyone, even outside of education. With this proposal for a rebranded remote learning, 63 online, we aim to facilitate remote learning in ways that more closely parallel what happens during typical school instruction. On to you, Dr. Clay.
All right, thank you. So shifting to a hybrid model, which under our proposal would be not before September 29th based on the metrics and the data, but also there would be a fully remote option would remain available. A deadline for parents to select that would be by September 11th, and any changes after that would be based on a trimester. So if a parent on September 11th says they want their child to go remote, then they're committing to that through the full first trimester, and then they would decide again for the second trimester and so on. We've already made the decision that fall athletics and extracurricular activities are all canceled, and we will continue to work with our students and families to ensure equity and access to quality instruction for all students. And then I believe we're back to Mr. Roberson.
I wasn't gone for long. Okay. So here you will see kind of a tentative daily schedule for what hybrid instruction would look like in our district. You'll notice here that we have 4 proposed start times, elementary, pre-K, and then 2 different start times at Gemini. So specifically at Gemini, the goal would be to minimize the amount of students and staff in the hallways at one time. So these start times would stagger. 6th grade would begin their day about 30 minutes before 7th and 8th grader students would arrive and begin their day. And then at the conclusion of the hybrid day, there would be a bit of a staggered dismissal as well. Next slide. So this is a quick snapshot of what the proposed hybrid learning will look like for students in grades kindergarten through 8th grade. Pre-K is missing from this slide, as hybrid instruction will look very similar to what it has looked like in the past, but it would be just a bit shortened a little bit to maximize cleaning between morning and afternoon classes. So this schedule shows that at both Gemini and in our elementary schools for the hybrid schedule, students would attend in the morning for in-person instruction and core academic subjects. So that would be English language arts, so that would encompass reading and writing, math, science, social studies, and social emotional learning and supports. We definitely know during this crazy time that the mental health of our students is definitely what we would call a core subject area. And this social emotional component would be facilitated at Gemini through advisory classes. After going home for lunch, students would then finish their day through 63 online or remote learning at home. Elementary students would participate in their daily PE, art, music, and library classes, along with a bit more independent learning time, such as independent reading, extended science learning activities, etc. Our Gemini students, on the other hand, would finish their last 2 periods of the day at home, and that would be PE and then an elective class. Next slide. And then finally, this visual, which shows kind of 2 roads running parallel to one another, shows that both of these plans, so 63 online and the hybrid learning approach, would work closely to mirror one another to the greatest extent possible. So students will still have 5 hours of daily learning time in both scenarios. A big focus will be on new learning for both. Students will have the biggest chunk of their day through live instruction, either through a virtual platform or in person with a hybrid model. And grading and report cards will be important feedback vehicles for both plans. On to you, Dr. Clay.
Okay, so it's important to keep in mind that regardless of when we go back to in-person learning, it's going to look different than what we're used to. I think we've already kind of gotten used to things looking different, but even going back into our schools will look different. Students, when they come back, will be assigned certain doors to enter. They already do some of that in our schools, but we'll be spreading kids out more and more so that we don't have large groups, or keep the groups as small as possible. At Gemini, we'll be staggering the bus arrivals and the departures. Sixth grade will come at one time, and the seventh and eighth graders will come at a different time. For elementary and pre-K, bus dismissal will have a one start time, and cars and walkers will have another dismissal start time, again, to control crowds. It's important for our parents to understand that regardless of when we do this, the car lines are going to be longer, because we do know that there's lots of people who are uncomfortable putting their children on a bus during this. So we'll have to be prepared for long lines dropping off kids, and parents will have to stay in their car when they drop off the kids. Face coverings will be required for all students, staff, and visitors, with very limited exceptions, and social distancing rules will be observed. There will be no lunch consumed in the buildings. Students who purchase or receive free low-cost meals will receive a sack lunch to take home. Students who get breakfast at school will eat spaced 6 feet apart. Water fountains will be disabled, and we will not use any lockers. And our elementary students will have an outdoor movement break when possible, but no recess as we know it today. So staying safe, a little bit more about face coverings. We will expect everyone, as I said, to wear a mask that covers both their nose and their mouth at all times when in the presence of other people. And no one without a medical exemption will be permitted to remain in the school without a face covering. Social distancing, there will be markers placed outside and in hallways, just like we're seeing in the stores today. No group activities. We're staggering our arrivals and departures. We're removing any furniture that we don't need from classrooms so we can maximize the space that we have. But everyone needs to understand that we probably cannot maintain a 6 foot. I'm going to change that statement. We definitely cannot maintain a 6 foot separation for all kids in their classroom. There just is not enough room for that many kids. And also something I mentioned at the last board meeting, we have moved away from desks and moved in tables to many of our classrooms, maybe most of our classrooms even, because we wanted kids to be working together, collaborating, and doing that kind of stuff. And now we're asking to separate them. So that's one of those things that we cannot pull off completely, is the social distancing at a 6 foot level. Hand washing and sanitizing will be a big part of what we teach our kids, and we will do on a regular basis throughout the day. Every classroom will have hand sanitizer available. Sanitizing stations will be placed at our entrances and common areas that don't have sinks. Cleaning protocols will be up to standard for today's situation. Every school will have a commercial strength disinfectant sprayer. Maintenance staff will sanitize surfaces daily. Bathrooms will be done multiple times each day, and sanitizing wipes will be available in the classrooms. For transportation, no more than 50 students will be allowed on a bus. Face coverings will be required by students and drivers. Social distancing protocols used for waiting and entering and exiting the vehicle. We'll have the windows down in the bus to keep air circulating when weather permits. Bus providers have implemented rigorous cleaning and disinfecting procedures. And drivers in the car lines must stay in their vehicles because those lines will be long. For food service, again, we'll continue to have breakfast and lunch for those who need it. For the building and other modifications, all of our offices in their schools have already been outfitted with plexiglass physical barriers between the secretaries and the people coming into the office, since our secretaries greets most of the people as they walk into the building. The heating and cooling system will run 24 hours a day to ensure adequate ventilation. Again, water fountains are disabled. No lockers will be used. So supply sharing will be limited. And just to explain that quickly, in our elementaries especially, it's very common to have shared supplies, like pencils in the middle of the table, crayons are shared and such. That will be stopped as much as possible at this point in time so that kids aren't sharing those. And virtual meetings will be encouraged for if parents need to meet with teachers or the principal. We will strongly encourage that they do that virtually. And then, of course, some of our biggest challenges are making sure that we're meeting the needs of our students with special needs, and we're continuing to work closely with the parents and our service providers to make sure that we're going to be able to do that. Expanded learning is also going to be a key part of what we're working on, and they'll be there to support our families. So when we're fully remote, whether that's how we start the year or if we end up back in full remote mode, there will be full day childcare and remote learning assistance available from 7:30 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon. During hybrid learning, there will be childcare and remote learning assistance in the afternoon when the kids leave school, and there'll be regular before and after school programming also available. For the fees, there will be no additional fee for care provided during the remote learning school day. But parents will be charged a fee for care provided outside of that time frame. And then safety precautions and protocols will be doing the same kinds of things that we are doing in our schools. And also, these kind of programs will also follow the Department of Child and Family Services guidelines. So a big question is, what happens if someone gets sick? And one of the things that we've spent quite a bit of time trying to grapple with is what to do about the large number of staff who travel over the summer and families who go visit their family members in other parts of the world and other parts of the country. And many of them are coming back from other hotspots, especially if they're traveling in the United States, they're coming back from hotspots. So that guidance that we're getting is very confusing because it keeps changing. But we're going to keep a close eye on that and decide exactly how we will do that with our students and staff as they return. Self-screening will be the approach we will use for our staff and our students. So basically when a staff member or a child comes to school, they are certifying that they are symptom-free. The COVID-19 protocol, students and staff who present symptoms at school will be isolated and sent home. So if we see the symptoms, we will make sure we isolate that person quickly and get them home as soon as possible. So if that person or anybody is tested positive for COVID, they must self-quarantine for 10 days. And if they have symptoms but don't test positive, they must self-quarantine for 14 days. That seems confusing, and it'll be explained here shortly in another slide. It's on this slide, actually. So staff members or students who we believe have been in close contact with a person who has tested positive for the virus that is within 6 feet or more than 15 consecutive minutes will be informed and must self-quarantine for 14 days. And that's due to the length of time that it can take for symptoms to manifest themselves. Due to medical privacy laws, the individual who is affected by this will not be identified. And there will be lots of times when people will want to know, so they know if they've been in contact, but we will not identify that person. We cannot identify that person. And positive cases may lead to the closure of a classroom, multiple classrooms, or a school even. So returning to school after a positive diagnosis, they have to meet all three of these conditions. The individual is free from fever without the use of fever-reducing medications for at least 24 hours. The symptoms, including cough, have improved, and it has been at least 10 days since the onset of the individual's illness. So Dr. Schleiser will take this slide.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about a number of staffing considerations involved in the current situation. The first is disability accommodations. And when a staff member provides a workplace restriction or a request for an accommodation from their healthcare provider, I work with the staff member to determine if a reasonable accommodation can be provided so they can continue to perform their job. In our current environment, a number of staff members cannot work on site due to health issues and their greater susceptibility to COVID. So I'm actively working with individuals to determine whether or not we can provide accommodations, and one accommodation could be to be a remote learning teacher. But of course, if we come back to school, we will still have a remote learning option, but that's where the staffing could get tricky. Remote learning and on-site assignments, as Dr. Clay shared earlier, we have 17% of our staff that reported they would be unable to work on-site, and 35% of our families reported that they're not sure they're going to send their kids to school. So as you can imagine, those are pretty large numbers of students and teachers. And depending on which way the kids go and if they're going to come to school or not, that drives the staffing. So our staffing is going to have to be a fluid process. So you may see some kids changing teachers just because it's going to be a very involved process, and we're going to make every effort to make it as simple as possible. But there's so many variables involved that it is challenging. Another consideration is the expansion of the Family Medical Leave Act. As some of you may know, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act was passed earlier this year. And what that act calls for is for an expansion of the reasons family medical leave can be accessed. You can now access family medical leave for COVID symptoms or a positive COVID test, or for childcare issues related to COVID. So, for example, if my children can't go to school because their school is closed, I would be able to access up to 12 weeks of family medical leave under the FFCRA because I had to care for my children. So one of the variables here is that if a school district has to close, as Dr. Clay said, because they have an outbreak, teachers could potentially need to access the FFCRA leave, which of course would have staffing implications. And we are all interdependent. If you look at any school district within about an hour of us, odds are we might have a teacher who lives there who has kids in school. So we are interdependent, much like other districts affect us in this situation. We affect other districts with how things go in District 63. In terms of substitutes, teachers and teacher assistants and nurses and so on, a bit of good news here. We did survey our subs at the end of last year, but then we just resurveyed them last week because so many things have changed. And I'm happy to report that about 75% of the survey respondents reported that they do intend to work as substitutes. Now, we also need to consider that in the absence of COVID, we experienced great challenges staffing absences. Now we're looking at having fewer subs. But again, the positive is many of our subs are still willing to come into work. But many did ask about our safety practices protocols that we're putting in place. And certainly when we return, we'll be informing our subs of everything we've done and are doing to make the environment as safe as possible. And the last piece is that additional staff may be needed. At the time of our return, it's likely we are going to need some additional staff, including case investigators and contact tracers. So this is a job that probably medical professionals or someone with some medical training needs to do. But that's an example of a job that we don't have right now that is new, that we may need in every building. Because our nurses are going to be very busy, and it's highly unlikely that they'll be able to take on the contact tracing and case investigation duties. We're also looking at our custodial staffing, teachers, because as I said, there are a number of variables involving our teaching staff and many of our positions. Dr. Clay.
All right, thank you, Dr. Schleiser. And then just real quickly, a slide to show the additional costs that we have incurred so far. And I want everyone to know that we are spending carefully, but we are not holding back on things that we need. If what we need to make kids safe and staff safe, we are willing to spend, but we're doing it carefully. So you can see we've got $366,000 spent on additional technology, $200,000 in building costs. That's all the sanitizer and wipes and cleaning services, and then $110,000 in teaching and learning materials. And so to sum it up, our next steps, tomorrow we'll be rolling out the draft plan, whichever way we go. Parents will be invited to submit questions for online presentation. I will be recording my responses to those questions. On August 5th, that presentation will be posted to the district website. August 6th, we have our board meeting and final vote on the proposed plan. And then August 17th through the 19th, we'll be working on all of our communications and everything else for getting school up and running in whichever way we are getting it started. And so then that brings us to questions. And you can see on this slide, it shows that you can submit those questions if you're not in this meeting by going to our website. So at this point, we're open to discussion with from the school board.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start since it's so quiet. If maybe, I think it would be helpful if somebody could give like a sample day of what the child's day would look like. So how it's, because all what parents know is how it was before. And we got, it was a lovely presentation on how it's going to be a lot more stringent, a lot more challenging. But what would a typical day look like? Like they're not just logging in at 8 o'clock and staying logged in till 2. How do they log in, how to log out, what goes on, kind of, you know what I'm saying? I think that would be helpful for parents.
So are you suggesting doing that right now, is describing it, or you mean put something together like a schedule or like a day in the life?
Well, I don't know. It's just a thought I had now I think would be helpful for parents so that, because obviously every classroom is going to be run a little bit differently too, and it's going to be different for the different grade levels. But maybe the parents, it would be helpful for the parents to know that they have to log in. Like before, I know some schools where the kids could do the work at any time during the day and it wasn't necessarily live. And now we're really focusing on the live component. So they have to log in during that class period, correct?
Correct. Mr. Robertson, you want to kind of talk about that?
Yeah, I can do my best to give just kind of a summary. So we talked about live instruction being the biggest part of students' day for this plan. So I'll just kind of give you maybe the lens of like what a 4th grade student's day could look like. So largely, the day would begin with some sort of a class meeting of some sort, a check-in, like we talked about, that social emotional component being so important. And then we would, every grade level would kind of have a different schedule because we have resource teachers that have to push in and support students. But we could say that we would look, for instance, after that class meeting in that 4th grade classroom, we would have our reading workshop time start. That would typically kick off with some sort of a mini lesson, whole class mini lesson with students, similar to what we would do with in-person instruction. And then after that, the teacher would decide at that time what small groups or one-to-one conferring that the teacher would do with students on the books that they're reading and the mini lesson that we worked on. So that's going to change from classroom to classroom, obviously based on the needs of the students. Students would have a quick little break and they would shift into writing instruction. You would see a very similar approach. A quick, succinct kind of mini lesson with the entire class, and then focusing on small group and conferring instruction as students are writing. We would then most likely move into math instruction, which would follow a similar format, kind of whole class instruction on the grade level lesson. And then as students are working independently, the teacher would check in with small groups or one-to-one. Science and social studies, of course, is still in the core. However, that most likely will be the pieces that will be facilitated more independently. We're really looking at kind of our reading, our writing, and our math instruction to really have the live teacher kind of connectedness with students. And then as I had talked about our special classes, we'll have live components and pre-recorded components because they have to see lots of different classrooms at the same time. So there would be a rotation there. Gemini largely would be more with checking in with your teacher at the beginning of a period with some sort of grade level sort of instruction. And as students are working independently, those teachers are obviously working with small groups and students one-to-one. So what we're really trying to replicate is what a typical school day would look like. So what we did last spring was a lot of flexibility where students could complete things at different times or watch pre-recorded lessons. We're really trying this time around to make it as live and responsive as possible. It's hard in pre-recorded or independent learning to really know how to support students and meet them where they are and help them grow. So really our focus is really to try to take what's happening in the classroom in a typical day and try to facilitate it through some live instruction and kind of that model. I hope that answers your question. That's kind of a very general approach to what would be different for grades pre-K through 8th grade.
No, yes, thank you. I think that will help clarify for parents, because I think that some confusion that I've heard from people is like, how's it going to be different? And what's with the live, thinking that now their child has to log into a Google Meet at 8 o'clock and they're on that computer screen then with one-on-one with, or 20 in the classroom with the teacher from 8 o'clock into the lunch break. And then they're back on again for the afternoon, where, you know, how did the pullout classes work then? Like they log on, they get the whole group instruction, the mini lessons, then they can log off and work on their own while a teacher logs on again with a group of 2 that need a little bit extra help or something like that. And then they have a time where they're supposed to log back in again. Is that?
Yeah, exactly. It's very similar to like if we were in person, right? We would facilitate, like you said, a mini lesson for reading. And when students went back to start reading their book, the teacher would be either conferring with students one-to-one or pulling small groups. So we would look to replicate that as good as we could virtually. So that would be the goal. Really, it's going to look much more like a typical day as much as you can do over a virtual platform.
So then how do the children know which ones? Okay, will the teacher just say, okay, Jimmy and Susie, I'm going to send you another meet now so that you can log back in with me in a few minutes. It's time for your check-in. And, you know, Betty and Sarah, your day will be tomorrow. And she'll have a rotating schedule going, kind of like what they do in the classroom, working with different pods of kids.
Yeah, Mrs. Urban. So it would look very similar to that, where they would schedule it in a rotating schedule. But also the platform that we use is Google Meet. And so similar to the feature that Zoom has, you're able to put students into smaller rooms, like into smaller groups, or they can work. So Google Meet is rolling out those same features. So a teacher they could manage it with like a rotating schedule of seeing different groups, or they could say that day from the mini lesson, oh, I want to see these 4 students. I'll put you into a room within the same room, and then the other students could work independently until the teacher is ready to meet with others. So kind of like the classroom, the management structure will be more so up to the teacher, but the importance will be communicating to the students how that will happen. So. Okay,
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I have a follow-up question to that. Sorry,
sure.
Crystal. I'm glad you used 4th grader. I have 4th grader this year. I can visualize him doing that. What I can't visualize is my kindergartner doing that successfully. So could you elaborate on what that would look like for a kindergartner, 1st grader, maybe even some 2nd graders might have a little more difficulty with that type of a program?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question. And that's why it's hard to give like one answer that works for every grade level. I think I think the important thing is that we'll trust our teachers to approach it with what's developmentally appropriate for our students. So for kindergarten, for instance, they're going to need more breaks. The teachers know what it's like to teach reading in the classroom and how many breaks the students need, how long that they can sustain attention. So, to give you an example, when we designed our full day kindergarten program, we put in a lot of breaks and music and movements used for purposeful reasons and different things like that, because development of the students can only focus for so long. So reading instruction at the beginning of the year, you would always assume that a kindergartner can sit, quote unquote, for about 10 to 15 minutes for a mini lesson. But then we have to kind of fall into the stamina for those students. So what's the stamina that a student can read independently and for how long? And knowing that a kindergartner at the beginning of the year can't do that necessarily like they can at the end. So that's going to look a little bit more different. The teacher can set up some different independent activities. The teacher can pull them back in for some whole class work and back out. So it's going to be a mix of those sort of things. I can't give you a perfect answer over this kind of a platform, but I think something that we have to do in these situations is trust our teachers that are experts in a lot of ways with students at their varying grade levels. And if they've taught kindergarten for 5 years, they're going to have a good idea of how to facilitate that virtually, knowing that they can only attend for so long. In the classroom, we do it all the time. Our kindergartners come in and some of them can read for a little bit and some of them need a lot more support to read. And we kind of balance that the same way. I wish there was like a perfect answer, one size fits all I could give you, but it's that's where we fall back on the expertise of our teachers and how they know to facilitate it for what's appropriate for those grade levels.
So they covered the elementary kind of level. I just had a question when it came to Gemini. Is the thought is that they would have their schedule and they would follow their schedule and log into each classroom at their scheduled times? Because I know back in the spring, it was kind of a lot of teachers had meetings at 11, 11:20, 11:40, even though that period technically would have been at 8 o'clock in the morning. So like, would they follow more of their schedule and time frame, or is that the thought?
Yeah, great question. Yes, they would much more follow their periods. And our proposal at the moment is that Gemini would follow more of a modified block schedule. So a block schedule is where you kind of take the typical 9-period day they would have, and you would split that into 2 days, and they would have more time with those periods. So I think some of the feedback that we had from students last spring was that having all of those periods in one day and trying to manage it all was a big thing to do. And I think we kept also thinking about our 5th graders transitioning to 6th grade and what a big shift that will be for them. So the modified schedule would be where students would have their advisory every day. So that would be a period that would happen every day. That mental health, social, emotional check-in is important. And then they would only have 4 of their classes on an A day and then the other 4 on the B day. And the actual time allotted to those subject areas would be longer on those days, but they would check in kind of like each period for that schedule. So they would follow it, like you said, Zizek.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Hello. All right, so I've got some thoughts around this. First of all, I want to say thank you to everybody who participated in putting this plan together. It is not an easy task right now to put anything together. And I think no matter what happens, we will make some people happy and some people unhappy, no matter which route we go. So I think that's got to be understood. However, that said, I personally cannot support the plan as it stands today. I really do strongly feel that we need to open with some type of in-person hybrid model on or around August 20th. I think one of the parents in the emails today had said this, and I've been doing a lot of my own research and soul searching the last few days. There's been plenty of preschools that have been open with 50% capacity. They are solid because there's lines to get in, because I have coworkers trying to get their kids back into preschool and they're at 50%. I've not heard of any major outbreaks. There's an article in the Tribune today stating that kids under 10 are less likely to get or pass COVID on. Camps have been open. There's been a few outbreaks, but for the most part, Maine East has been running a camp. Maine South, all the local schools around us have been running camps. Travel teams have been traveling. We are in phase 4, which is return to school, at least as of today. CDC says return to school. Maine Township is returning to school. They are doing it a little bit differently. They're bringing just the freshmen for the first few weeks, and then everybody else starts right after, I think, September 6th or 7th. I do feel schools are essential. We are essential workers. I work for a company that's an essential workers. I go into work every single day. And it's hard to leave the house for the first time when you've been home for months. But once you do it, you actually feel like you're accomplishing something, you're helping others. The other thought I've really been thinking about is a lot of folks have said, well, let's wait till a vaccine. We don't know that there will be a vaccine. A lot of people say there will be. Even if so, Dr. Fauci just said it will not be till early 21, which means realistically nothing will change between now and September 28th. It really means we are saying we will be remote all year. On top of that, 40% of Americans say they will not accept the vaccine. So what will we do? 40% of our staff and students decide not to get vaccinated. Will we keep schools closed again? I really feel that this is an opportunity for us to take the hybrid model and make it work. Whether we bring in maybe just 6th graders for a while and then the 7th and 8th graders or whatnot. But this is my point of view. Obviously, everybody else has a different point of view. But today, the way we are in the state and the way we are with cases locally, I really feel we should open. So that's my opinion.
I have a similar perspective to Walter. I am curious if it was discussed about allowing parents to choose whether or not they would do remote or in person, and if there would be a way to make it so that they could opt in person, and then the classrooms could be assigned at that point so that on August 20th, you've either opted in for in-person or you've opted out for remote, which would make classroom rearrangements and adjustments not necessary. So students could stay within their own classroom starting at the beginning of the year. I think that's very tumultuous for children to have to start one way and then go back. And I agree with Walter's point that come September 28th, we're probably going to be in the same spot that we're in right now. I don't see it changing a lot. So if that's the case, would we end up being remote all year? I also am very hesitant about the concept that students would be able to get to know their teachers through this platform. Having a child that cried incessantly because he could not handle the stress of being in front of a computer to talk to his teacher, whom he loved. I cannot imagine him being faced with 30 little boxes and having to sit in front of them. So I don't quite know how that would be a safe space for some of those students. I also have read some of the emails from Dr. Clay about the participation in remote learning. I'm very concerned that those students that either their parents can't be sitting there helping them navigate because they're working or they have younger children to tend to, I feel that a lot of those kids will get lost by the wayside. So does that mean that for 5 weeks they don't have education or longer if we decide to keep it remote? So for those reasons, I'm also hesitant to approve the plan as it stands.
If I could, I'd like to address some things that Walter and Katie both said. I don't think it's any surprise after that presentation that I disagree with a few points. First of all, Katie, I think one of the things that we're trying to avoid is that tumultuous switch back and forth that you referred to. That's one of the reasons why I think it's important to start remotely, because I do believe wholeheartedly if we open up, we are going to have staff who get sick quickly, and we're not going to be able to run a school with teachers who are infected with COVID-19 or who have family members who have it and they are in close contact. So that's one of the big concerns, is that keeping our staff healthy enough to actually run the schools. And then Walter, you mentioned daycare is running at 50%. We would not be opening schools with 50% of our kids. And that's the problem. We would have classrooms with 20 to 25 kids in them and not being able to socially distance. I also think daycares have a little more control over what kinds of activities and things they do there. So while I think that's great that they're able to do it, I'm not sure that that's a fair comparison to running a school.
Scott, I appreciate that. The one thing that I maybe didn't make clear is I'm not supporting that we go to 100%. I'm supporting a hybrid model. So we should never have 25 kids in the class. If a normal class is 25, let's even say 30, we shouldn't have more than 14 or 15.
All right, well, and then that, Walter, that brings up the point that the model that we proposed to you for hybrid is not that. And that's what we talked about at the July board meeting, was that we didn't know how we could make that work with staff and doing remote learning at the same time as an AV model. We have not developed that plan, so if the board wants us to do that, we're going to be way behind the 8 ball trying to go back and redevelop that.
Oh, okay, I see. I missed that portion of it. Okay. I got you. That's afternoon would be all high or all e-learning, and okay. I'm thinking of the township plan as well, which is
right. Yeah, it's all, ours would be all kids in the morning, right?
Yep.
I have a question. Can you please provide a little bit more specific information on how the child care and what that would look like at expanded learning during the remote period, if families choose to do that, what that would look like?
All right, Angie, would you like to take that?
Sure. So we would offer childcare, and we would adhere to our DCFS school age childcare guidelines, or we would have ratios of 1 staff member to 15 students. The goal would be to create a 6-foot distance between the students and their desks within each classroom, and within each have them have their own, say, square where they can still utilize some flexible seating options. They're not just sat in front of the computer at the desk during their remote learning time. They can sit on the floor, they can sit on the desk, they can sit on the chair or stand with their computer. So that gives them a little bit more flexibility. In that, our staff would guide them through their learning. So we would be provided schedules from teachers, and we would have students grouped by grade level. So we'd get the schedules from the teachers and know which students need to be doing live instruction when, and all those core topics would be covered in the morning. So we'd be able to manage that, and we would manage lunch by having it outside as often as possible, or by eating lunch in the classrooms 6 feet apart. Continued disinfection of all surfaces that are frequently touched would happen throughout the day. We would have custodial staff managing the disinfection of surfaces and bathrooms throughout the day and every night. We would spend as much time as we could outside and within our small pods. So we would limit the amount of staff that would be introduced to different groups. So we try to keep that as consistent as possible. And we would keep the groups as consistent as possible. We would, with DCFS guidelines, we do temperature check the students as they walk in. We make sure that they are self-certified, they are symptom-free. We follow the same re-entry guidelines as the district does as well.
Thank you.
I have a comment. You know, I using the guiding light of safety, I have to say that I do support the plan. Only for a couple of reasons. Well, what I'm seeing is districts that were originally going to go all in are taking a second look at that. I think a good example is District 62. And they were going to go 5 days. I think they're backing off from that. Maine Township, although they put out their plan, was very clear that they're not voting on this until the first week of August. So I think there's still a lot of questions about how to do it. And I would hate to see us, go all full force and then have an issue. It'll be very hard to recover from that. And in as much as it's very difficult, and I agree, obviously with Katie and Walter, we all want our kids to be back in school. There's no question about that. It is the best way to learn. And unfortunately, for us to push this too quickly, I think might be a mistake. And I just think we have to really walk this very carefully.
Apparently, Culver recently just sent a letter out saying they're either going full remote or looking at going full remote, and District 25 also is doing the same thing.
Okay. I would like to hear from all board members, because this is obviously, I let me just say, ever since we started discussing this, I have been in such conflict, and I have thought of so many different scenarios. I have looked at pros, I've looked at cons, I have thought we should definitely do this one approach, and then I would nix it later in the day. I mean, this is how fluid this is. And I also wear different hats. As an educator, I know for myself, I would want my students in front of me. I know that. But I'm also a parent, a community member, a board member. And I'm in conflict still. I don't know what the right answer is. I don't think there is a right answer. And I just am very fearful that, as Tom said, that we're going to make a mistake and then not be able to recover from it. And I that is my greatest worry. So as I said, I wish that we could get a crystal ball so we can see what this is going to look like. On a daily basis, I look at the statistics for Region 10, which is where we're in. And sadly, the percentages are increasing. And that scares me. That scares me. And I think I mentioned this at the last board meeting too. We can put in all of these safety guidelines, but our families and our students, especially the older ones, are they going to be social distancing the way they should be? And then if they're not, they're going to be coming to school and exposing our teachers and their students. So that's how I am feeling. I'm just one big ball of conflict right now. And so I really would like to hear from all of the parties that are involved, so that I can it helps me process my own feelings.
I would say that I agree with Tom, and going along with some of the things that Walter said. I've been doing some reading too, and they're saying that with your kids in daycare, and this is going to sound dorky, but a lot of those kids, because they're physically small, when they talk about the aerosol spray, it's not getting up to the adults. They're little kids, and their spray, they're suspecting, is not getting up to the adults. So they're not having the issues. I do agree with you that we are an essential service. But again, I don't think that there's any really good answer. And I do see, like Tom says, because I've been following, there's a lot of schools that are really starting to backtrack. And they're like, yeah, we're going to go remote learning. We're going to go remote learning. Because I do think that we're probably going to end up doing that eventually anyway. I look at some of the elements of the plan, and the fact that the students would go in the morning and we're not dealing with lunch, or we're not dealing with a lunch recess. And so I see the logic behind some of that. You're trying to, keep the environment as safe as possible, not having the kids with the masks off, talking and eating and dealing with the whole lunch recess thing. But like everybody else, I agree. There's no easy answer. There's no right answer. And I do feel that we're going to have to pivot no matter what we do. So those are my feelings.
Thank you. You know, the only other thing that I'm just going to throw out there, and again, this is me processing, is the fact that our youngest students, and at least thus far, the research has shown that our youngest students are not as likely to be carriers. I'm talking about primary grades. I don't know if that would even be an option for those students to perhaps be hybrid and everybody else be remote. I'm thinking out loud, please.
I like that thought a lot too, Alex. Even I can see a difference even between my 9-year-old and my almost 5-year-old. There's a lot of benefit there for those younger kids, whereas I feel like my 9-year-old, my 4th grader, would be successful with a remote plan. It's those younger kids. I looked at the data that was sent today to us about the kids that didn't participate, and they were significantly higher in those younger grades, kindergarten, 1st grade. I fear for those kids that they will struggle a lot to know how to engage with teachers that they don't know in a remote fashion. So I'm curious to that as well.
I have heard and read about some thinking in that same thing. Like I think they were saying maybe like K through 5th grade or something like that, having those kids doing more of a hybrid, but your junior high, your middle school kids and your high school kids doing the remote learning. So it is something that's out there, and it is something that, I think is valid, something to consider.
I would agree. I would like that approach as well. I think we would actually, my suggestion would be if we do like a K through 2 or K through 3, and then you do the 6th graders at Gemini, just like Maine Township is trying to do the freshmen for the first couple of weeks. It's a great way to test the system and work out any kinks. And it allows them to meet their teachers in person, while others, maybe you try to start them 2 or 3 weeks later. I'm still not on board with an all virtual start personally.
If I can just point out some of the downsides there.
Of course. That's why we're having this discussion.
I think we would have to split those kids up. If we're going to do that for safety reasons, we'd also want to make those class sizes smaller, which would mean those kids are split up among other teachers who don't normally teach the grades. So I don't know that it would eliminate the back and forth and the kids getting different teachers for different periods of time. Unless you're suggesting that we bring whole classrooms of kindergartners together.
Well, now that also assumes that 100% of kindergartners would actually choose the in-person hybrid model, versus if we think 60% of parents will say yes and 40% will do e-learning, that automatically reduces your classroom size. But we don't really know that until we make, I know like Maine Township, today was the day they had to make a decision. A lot of school districts who are trying to go hybrid are actually telling parents, you must make a decision or we'll make it for you and you'll go virtual.
I just don't think that we need to be the poster child for what not to do. Okay. And I just think moving forward, we need to err on the side of caution at this point. So, and I am all for, we need to be back in the school. I was the one who was saying, how are our teachers going to develop these relationships right away? Even if we could get a couple weeks in before we have to go remote, we need to get the relationships in. We need to teach these kids how to access things online, so it's all in there. And teachers from our district were telling me, we can do that online. I developed, I did this back in the spring to keep relationships with my kids. This is my plan for in the fall, how I'm going to do this and get these relationships from day one. So maybe somebody could, Erin, is there a plan, or is everybody kind of doing their own thing on how these teachers are going to establish these relationships right away, teach these kids how to access everything that they need to do online if they haven't done it in the past? And we've got new students that have moved in. How are we going to, set the stage so that this is as successful as possible right out of the gate?
Yeah, Mrs. Urban, I'll do my best to answer that question. So, one of the things
I know that was a lot. I'm sorry. That's okay.
In anticipation that we might have to do some sort of hybrid or remote learning this fall, our instructional coaches at the end of the school year, they actually worked an extra week to put together like sample lesson plans and introduction weeks for our teachers that they could utilize to build relationships remotely. We also, the state also provided us with 5 extra days that count as student days, but are actually teacher planning days. So what we did is we coupled that with the 2 institute days already in our calendar. So our teachers will be back for an entire week before students even begin. So a lot of that time will be set aside for collaboration between grade levels and departments to talk about what they need to do to build relationships with students. We've also set aside money out of Title II professional funds, so our teachers can be paid up to 2 extra days in the month of August to start to look at how they kick the year off for students. And then finally, our technology department and our digital learning coaches are currently putting together a robust PD plan for those first 5 days before school begins so that teachers feel comfortable with the technology platforms and then can facilitate that with students. They're also putting together tutorials for parents and students on how to use those as well with voiceovers and in different languages. So at least at this point, without having a firm plan, those are some of the pieces we put into place already.
Thank you. It's just as a board member from a different district said to me, COVID doesn't pick what day of the week that they want to infect everybody. So very true. So I think with that in mind, it's just kind of, we need to start remotely. And I wasn't for starting remotely at the beginning. I mean, those of you who heard me in the different, I've gone back and forth too, just like Alex has, because it's like, well, you need those relationships. You need to do this. Oh no, okay, we can handle it. And then it's like the numbers are going up and then everybody's changing and deciding and you're just, your mind is spinning. And I think at this point, giving our teachers that professional development to really make sure that they can make those connections with the kids starting day one, so you get those kids to buy in. And that we stress with the parents how important this is for them to log in right away at 8 o'clock, that they can't choose to do their homework at 8 o'clock at night because we want the face-to-face as much as possible. We want the live interaction as much as possible. And if these families need help making that happen, that we're there for them to give them the help that they need and do whatever we can for that. So if we make sure our staff is aware of that and they can get the principals and the social workers in and everybody that we need to get in to make sure that we have 100% buy-in from our parents, and then we'll get it from our students as well.
And again, here's a thought that, so I know that certainly in the spring with myself and my own students, I was very concerned that unfortunately you always do have students that just don't perform to expectation. And it was my experience in the classes that I taught, those students who didn't really do much while school was in session, unfortunately just continued that same way. So they didn't do much for me when I was sitting in front of that student every day, and they continued not doing much for me at home. You're unfortunately always going to have a small percentage of students that are like that. I was thinking, and I don't know how feasible this is, but if we do have students that we have identified as being at risk for being, if we go remote, and maybe get the parents to agree to get them into expanded learning, so at least they'll have some support from adults there, that maybe that will give them the motivation so that they're not just falling by the wayside. Again, I don't know how feasible that is. I don't know if we can identify these students. Your thoughts?
We should be able to identify them based on what they did last spring through their e-learning, that I know we didn't have grades, but teachers know, oh yeah, they were on every day, or they turned in all their work, they got the complete I never heard from them once e-learning started. So there should be some way that we can reach out to those families before the start of the school year to stress the importance of this. And if they need assistance, to get them the assistance that they need.
I think that's something we could do fairly easily. We want to be careful that we don't block out people from expanded learning who need it for childcare, but I think that's a possibility. But there's also no reason why we couldn't do some small group, social groups or something, whatever you want to call them, occasionally bus kids in small groups that we feel are at risk, and have them make a connection with a teacher or something like that.
Because that, I have to tell you that would, knowing that would make me feel a lot better. I know that our teachers, our staff, our administrators do whatever they can, but like I said, we all know that we always have that small percentage that just, they're challenging. And I just don't want them to fall further behind than what they are.
Agreed.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm with Alex on a ball of not knowing what to do, what's right, what's wrong. At first, I wholeheartedly want my kids in school. I'm just not sure it's really that safe. I got a kid that was in 6th and 7th in March, so 7th and 8th for the fall, but e-learning was different at both levels. And if I know the e-learning has changed and it's being improved, that makes me feel more comfortable, that it's more set on a schedule. And it is, a thing I do ask, it goes to these kids that haven't done any work or not knowing. It took a teacher 2 months to reach out to a kid that hadn't been turning in work. So maybe, making that follow up a little more, hey, I haven't heard from you in a week, I should be following up, it shouldn't have been 2 months. That was my concern. But I try not to watch the news because it just gives me too much anxiety. But I know what's going on. And so I feel remote is probably the safest option right now. And I'm with, like Sheila said, I love being the front runner on technology and the way our buildings look and setting examples for many districts. But this isn't one I want to be in the front runner for. And if we make a mistake or it doesn't go our way kind of thing, I'd rather sit back and see what works. Yeah, I know the high school's going AB schedule right now. I'm interested to see if they're going Maine East, if it changes. So just my 2 cents.
Dr. Clay,
Sure.
I was wondering if you could answer a question for me. I was wondering where the September 28th date came from. And I'm wondering what benchmark is maybe going to be set to decide, kind of as Walter was saying, what's going to make us not say come September 27th, you know what, we're in the same spot. We're just going to go again till the end of the year. And then January, we just keep going. I guess, is there a benchmark? What determined September 28th? What will determine that we actually go do a hybrid schedule in the next,
Sure. September 28th was pretty much arbitrary as far as that goes. We wanted to make sure that we gave enough time to kind of see how things evolved over the next several weeks. We also wanted to give parents enough time with remote learning to kind of make an educated decision if they wanted to go with in-person or remote. So that's where that came from. Another factor there was that before we even put this plan together, we were thinking our preschool would stay remote until October 1st or around there, when the new building would surely be ready, and then we would just bring them in to that building at that time. So that's kind of how that date came about. Really, it's just buying time to figure out what is going on and how can we do this as safely as possible. The metrics that we would use are similar to the ones that the state's using to decide whether we're in phase 4 or phase 3. Are the cases going up? Are the hospitalizations going up or going down? All those kinds of things. And the general feeling of a lot of administrators and superintendents is that before long, the state's probably going to make this call for us because things aren't heading in the right direction. And so we most of us feel like we're going to be shut down at some point anyway.
Okay, I guess I'm a little confused because I know ISB in their guidelines said that they wanted as much in-person learning as possible. And as Walter said, we're still in phase 4. So I guess I don't quite understand how the decision would be changed because we're already not doing what they're suggesting.
Well, but what is happening is that the cases are going up and the metrics are not going in the right direction. It's not flying out of control like it is in many parts of the country yet, but it is heading in that direction. So as long as it's heading in that direction, I would not be comfortable recommending that we come out of remote learning. So
when September 28th comes around, if we're still at the same spot we are now, we will continue remote learning?
Well, if it's stayed where we are for at that point about 6 weeks or more, or I guess it would be 2 months at that point, then that would be a pretty stable situation. I would feel comfortable then. But what I'm saying is, if the curve continues to rise, even if it's a slow rise like it is right now, I wouldn't be comfortable with in person.
So the other thing is, obviously, we want to give our parents time as September 28th is coming, as that date approaches. So I think we would have to have, when we have to have like a deadline of, September, I don't know, I'm like 3 weeks ahead of that to give parents notice that we're either staying remote or going hybrid.
Sure.
So
yeah.
I think that is something, and again, I don't know what's operationally, what's feasible, but I think that is something that we also need to think about, because obviously we want to give our parents time now. We're going to be voting on this next week. We want, and then that's like 2.5 weeks before school is supposed to begin. So we want to give them ample notice, and then we need to give them ample notice. So really, we need to pick a firm date of determining, are we remaining remote or going hybrid? Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay.
And a lot of schools are starting out with their first trimester being the
yes. And I do know that. Yes.
But we may be cutting it short, actually, by saying September 28th, in my opinion.
Okay.
When is the end of the first trimester?
November. What, Aaron, do you have that date?
I don't have it on me, but I can quickly take a look. It's right around conference time, which is typically in November. But I will take a look and get that answer to you in just a second.
I have another question about the students that maybe aren't participating in remote. I know that Mr. Roberson said that we would hope that the teachers would reach out to them to encourage and facilitate that with whatever means possible. I know you said there would be grading, whereas in the spring there wasn't grading, and people couldn't be penalized. What are the consequences for the students whose families don't have them participate for whatever reason that might be? If they haven't participated for 5 weeks, obviously there's academic consequences, but will they just continue as it goes? Do you know what I mean? Like at the end of the year, if they've missed those 5 weeks, is there a consequence, or will they just move up no matter what?
Yeah, so if you look at some of the research around retention, which is I think maybe what you're talking about, there's a good amount of research that actually retention harms students later on in life, maybe not initially. There's obviously some adverse effects initially, but it's been a district practice that we haven't retained students. I think like we did last spring, we would make every effort to try to engage those students. There's also a piece too, when students register and opt into attending in our district, they are subject to truancy laws as well. So that would be another piece of student attendance and completion and things like that. And I was just going to quickly tell you that the first trimester ends on November 11th. Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. That's actually longer than I thought. So, I mean, we hopefully we'll be back before that is
right.
What I would be hoping.
If you indulge me, I'd be curious to know if there are any of the building administrators that want to share just their thoughts about how the staff feels.
In their own professional opinion too, I would be curious.
Right.
Well, let me start. As the building principal, it's my responsibility, I feel, to look out for the health and the welfare of both my students and staff members. The virus is very uncertain, and every case is different. Back in March, we closed with many fewer cases, and it's just gone up. Children can carry the disease to their teachers, their parents, family members. Many of our families live together with multi-generations in one home. And so that's concerning too. Teachers are split. There are some who are in favor of remote. There are some who are in favor of coming back. It just depends. But again, it's my opinion that we should give the plan a chance, and it's going to look very different this year than it did in the spring because we've had time to plan for it, and it's just going to look different. And I think there's going to be a lot more learning going on, and we have things in place to engage the kids who might not have parents at home for them. And I do want to add also that for kids who didn't participate last year, our social worker contacted the homes. Mrs. Adis and I contacted the homes, and we made contact with every parent. And so if a child wasn't participating, we knew why. There was something going on at home. Maybe they had the COVID. Maybe there were other reasons. But we were able to account for every child. And so it's very important to us.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Sutton.
Mrs. Leitao, you were going to speak. You're maybe from the perspective of the subcommittee you're leading.
Sure. So, I agree with everything that Howard said and that many have shared this evening, and certainly also feel that sense of sort of conflict internally and knowing what's the right thing to do and knowing, unfortunately, there's not a great option out there that meets all of the objectives that we have. I led, and along with Brian Goretti and Jen Pacheco, we all led logistics subcommittees. And it does feel like quite an undertaking to ensure that all the safety precautions are in place, and the challenges of really promoting that social distancing among the students. So I think logistically there are multiple challenges. It's not that we can't overcome them, but it does feel daunting looking at the direction of cases right now and looking at that data. So I think there's a sense of having a little more time and a little more information if we can delay and start remote, allow our teachers and students to focus on instruction instead of safety protocols. And hopefully we have a clearer picture a little further into the school year. And we want to make sure if we're opening that we're fully confident that we can do so safely. And if there's a shadow of a doubt, it really feels, it doesn't feel good to put our students and staff and families in that position.
Thank you.
I also agree with the principals. I think our main priority always as educators is to create a safe environment. And when you have the numbers do show that the elementary students are less likely to have COVID, but when you also have 71 staff members at a school going in and out of classrooms, just the thought of tracing and finding out where that was and making sure everyone is safe, and the amount of young children who have to wash their hands, go to the bathroom, or learning to go to the bathroom. There are just a lot of safety precautions that I think we're all somewhat worried about, but we all want the children to go back, and we all know in our hearts that's what we want, but it's the safety part, considering the number is going up.
I have a question about when we do go back, if the student has a symptom or if a classmate tests positive and the kids are asked to go home, if a student is just sent home on their own individually, will they stay within that class? And how will their instruction be handled? How would that work? I don't know if that came out correctly. And then would a sibling also be asked to stay home in that scenario?
All right, so the student tested positive in your scenario?
Yeah, or I think if I remember right, I don't have it in front of me, the symptoms, if they had a symptom, they had to stay home for 14 days. Is that right? If they tested negative but had symptoms?
It's confusing. If they tested positive, it's 10 days.
Okay.
Or 24 hours after the fever's gone and symptoms have
right.
If they've had close contact, then it's 14 days.
Okay.
So let's say the child tests positive for COVID. Obviously, that child would be sent home immediately or would be quarantined. Yes, we'd have to do contact tracing. We'd have to find out how closely that student interacted with other students, including siblings. Siblings would have to be quarantined. Probably a significant number or several kids in the classroom, because I don't think any of us feel totally confident that we're going to be able to keep kids from interacting closely with each other as much as we'll try. So yeah, it could it could end up closing the whole classroom. The kids wouldn't move out of that classroom. I don't know how we would handle remote. If the whole class was closed down, that teacher could just move into remote teaching and handle the class. If it's just a few kids, I think we still have to figure that out. Unless Aaron, unless your plan has that covered.
I think this would qualify as extenuating circumstances that we would have to, if we were doing the hybrid plan, remote learning would be happening at the same time. So most likely if they would be quarantining, then as a district, we would provide remote services for those students. But like Dr. Clay said, if an entire classroom had to quarantine, then that teacher could do it. But we would find a way to make that work.
But they would have a different teacher if they went to the remote learning.
They would shift into a couple weeks of a different teacher. So if a teacher is teaching in person, that teacher can't also simultaneously do the remote learning. So they would have to have another teacher for a few weeks until that period was over.
So it sounds complicated. I'm not a teacher, but how do they make sure they're on the same lesson track and all of that?
Yeah, you bring up a great point of more so than ever that our teachers are going to have to be as lockstep as possible while also being responsive to your students. So we have kind of pacing guides for grade levels and subject areas so that teachers are staying on the same track. We've identified at the end of the school year essential standards that teachers will be focusing on throughout this whole process. So that will be in place, but it's possible a teacher could be ahead a couple of lessons or behind. That's just the nature of teaching, unfortunately. But luckily, we have a system-wide approach to instruction, so our teachers will be similar places instructionally.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Mr. Roberts,
and I think,
go ahead.
Yeah, Ms. Anderson, I think you bring up a good point. And one of the things that we talked about at the middle school, so our students would be in pods, essentially. They wouldn't move, the teacher would move. But that teacher then moves from pod to pod, and they've now seen 5 pods of students in a day for 40 to 80 minutes at a time with much less than 6 feet of distancing. One of the other struggles at the middle school is Dr. Clay had said we got rid of desks. The most desks we have in any classroom in Gemini are 8. And that's in some of our classes only have 4. So then we have students sitting at the tables together with each other. And let's be honest, we're going to say no social, you can't interact with each other, stay your distance, but they find ways and we can't, so that's one of the things we really struggle with. And then, as Mr. Sussman said, one of the things that I've lost a lot of sleep about is, I'm the one that, we have to face these staff members every day that are coming into this building, and knowing that we are putting them in some type of uncomfortable situation and asking them to teach on top of being worried that, am I going to take this home to my family? Am I going to get something, especially when they're working with, 11 to 14-year-olds who are showing that it's easy as anybody else to transmit this virus. I think that's a very stressful environment to put our teachers in. I also think that when we think about coming back to school, it's going to be different. It's not going to be, we're going to make it as fun and as social as possible, but at the same time, it's almost going to be militant in a way. You're off the bus, you're in a line, you're in your room, you're in your seat. Like, that's it. And to tell a 12-year-old that that's your seat and you really can't get up and move around like you used to. You get to get up every 40 minutes for your little stretch break I think it's going to be really difficult. I do think we've put a lot of thought into this, how we're going to do this remote learning. And I think the best thing to do would be we've planned our work. Now we need to work our plan.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. I do want to make one pitch again regarding our website, that if there are any community members, parents watching, if you do want to submit a question, you may do so by going to our district webpage, and when you select Back to School 2021, and scroll down, there will be a submission form for you in both English and Espanol to submit a question. So I just wanted to remind everyone, those that are watching, it is not late to submit a question, and those will be compiled, and Dr. Clay will be answering those questions for you at a later time. Any other comments, concerns?
I just wanted to add a little bit. I share in the sentiment of our fellow principals. And when I think of preschool, I think of a very different environment than what we're currently envisioning. And I think of our earliest learners and what they're going to be coming back to. And I think some of my concerns just lie in all the changes that will be ahead. They're going to have to get used to not seeing people fully, and when we think about the language that they need to be working on and expanding on. But also when I think of preschool, I think of students being next to each other and sharing and learning how to play together. And that I think is my biggest struggle and my biggest worry is how are we going to teach those routines and work with those students. And part of the reason we wanted to start remote with preschoolers was because of the changes going from, learning routines in 3 different buildings across the district and then moving them again, and they're learning new routines and procedures in the new early learning center. But my biggest concerns is just making sure that we're ready for those preschoolers when they come into that classroom. So it still can be a warm and caring environment, and that we're setting it up so that we can individualize some of those materials for students and really create those environments where, they might not be sharing all those materials, but they're still having the opportunities to enjoy that environment and play and interact from a distance.
Thank you.
If I could just add to Ms. Golick's point, we know that remote learning was a challenge for some of our earliest learners and our students with special needs, especially students with very significant special needs. Over a screen can be very abstract, and they need things that are much more concrete. What we learned over the summer through doing ESY remotely is that students really benefit from having more concrete objects, tasks, things that they can manipulate and move, whether that's independently or with the modeling of a teacher virtually. So we have asked our self-contained teachers, and I will be asking some of our preschool teachers to keep that in mind as we start to plan and purchase items. What are some things that we can do to be more responsive and provide our families with the supports that they need in order for students to engage more actively in their virtual learning? Our related service providers had a lot of success providing little kits of different activities for fine motor and gross motor activities, different things for speech that were a little bit more concrete, things that students could hold and show and describe. So those are some things that we are actually already taking steps to do to be more responsive to our earliest learners and our most vulnerable learners with significant needs. Additionally, all of our students with IEPs will have those temporary remote learning plans developed for them that's responsive to those IEP goals and ties what we're doing in that virtual setting with what we would be providing them in that in-person setting as well.
Thank you.
I'm curious if there will be school supply lists or materials that are needed for kids for the remote learning. Are we going to get information about what we need to have at the ready for our children so that they can participate fully with their teachers? Is that the same list that I've seen for school, or is it a little bit different? And if so, will that information be sent out to parents and so that they can be prepared for the first day, especially for the younger kids that maybe can't do everything on the computer?
Aaron, that sounds like a question for you.
Yes, there are definitely some things that we have not communicated to families yet, and that would be one of them. Obviously, we want to wait until we have a firm decision. So yes, our plan would be that students would need some materials virtually, but they wouldn't need necessarily everything they normally would. So sometimes on our class supply list, they have like dry erase markers or different things that they would use in the classroom they wouldn't necessarily need at home. So they would be adjusted, and we would give that to parents as in advance as we could. I do know one of the biggest supplies, which is making sure that every student has a device. Our technology department has been working the entire summer to make sure that is ready to go, and that we will have, should we do 63 online to start the year, all students will have a computer for each child in the home, along with Wi-Fi hotspots if our families need those as well. So that's something we have been able to work on so far.
Excellent.
I was just going to ask, I don't even know if this is possible because we are so big, but with what was said about like the little kits that were made available for our struggling learners, could we do something like that on a larger scale for our classes, where the kids come in, even like we won't be doing an open house obviously for any of these classrooms this year, so if we're on remote. So could we do something where the students come in at an assigned time and they pick up their little learning kit and they get to meet their teacher from 6 feet away, but whatever, so that their little kit then could be the little counters that they use in first grade when they're learning, or a little, a couple books for them to read, or a whiteboard. And then when we do go back to in-school learning, then that comes back with them, and then that remains theirs for the remainder of the year. And that, so we're not sharing that type of thing, and it might help with a little bit of making those connections and getting that buy-in a little bit more when they've got the school stuff with them. I don't know if that's possible because we are so big, but it's, again, as Alex is doing, I'm just thinking out loud here. So
is that a me question again?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. That is something that we've talked about as a principal group. So we have been meeting quite a bit to iron this out, and we're meeting again tomorrow to talk about some of these logistics. And one of them will be that each teacher over those 5 days before school begins will be able to put together kind of a package that students in their class would pick up that might have like a math workbook, like you talked about, counters or things that they might need. And in terms of, so anyway, that isn't set in motion. So what we have to decide as a principal group of how that pickup looks. And in terms of the meeting your teachers face-to-face, I might let Dr. Clay talk about that. I do know as a principal group, we talked about when teachers are back in session, making introduction videos for students to see and have it sent to them. But Dr. Clay, maybe you can talk about if meeting your teacher in person is possible.
Yeah, we, for now anyway, we decided that's probably not the safest thing to do either, is try to figure out how to bring groups of kids in. But I think what I talked about earlier does work, that when, if there are kids that we feel are at risk that really aren't making connection online, we can schedule some in-person small groups or one-on-one with teachers. I think we want to do that strategically, not as a widespread practice.
I love that idea, Sheila. I think it's brilliant. I know, especially for my littlest one, I think that would go a long way with him to be able to actually get on the computer and not be scared of it. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's a lot of emotion, I know. I'm so sorry.
No need to apologize.
That in-person connection, if there's any possible way to do that, I think that could go a really long way.
I agree. We will continue to talk about that, Katie. I don't think anybody disagrees that, especially those little ones, our kindergartners, their first time, they need something.
Yeah.
We'll work on it.
Can I just add kind of my 2 cents on, as a parent and working with the district, is that all the same sentiment as all of the principals and all the administrators in terms of keeping our kids safe, keeping our staff as safe as we can, and starting remotely seems to be the safest option. And at the same time, we are still offering that childcare piece for those families who have to go to work, who are essential workers, who need that additional support for students. And so we are there to help with that piece as well. We're not just saying everybody will go remote and, kind of good luck to those who can't manage that. So I think we are providing the services we need to adequately serve our families.
Angie, do we know how many students you will be able to have in your program?
We are waiting to see how many people are interested and need the program. If we base our numbers around the summer programming that we would have as a sort of guide for numbers, we would be looking at around 130 to 150. and we would provide the remote learning assistance and childcare for the school day, as well as additional time beyond that for families who can't who would require that additional piece.
Thank you.
So what I'm hearing, what I would like to see, and I know this is, first of all, I'm just going to say that I want to thank Dr. Clay and everyone else on the leadership team, the building leaders, for all of your hard work, for your thoughtfulness. This is really hard. And, we don't work in factories where we're talking about widgets or plastic. We're talking about molding human beings, and it's really hard. And I think that's why this is so agonizing for all of us, because our gut is telling us one thing, what is the best for our students. But right now, it's just, we're all very, very scared, at least I am, that it's not safe. And I have to tell you, I don't want to be that district that's going to be on the news. God forbid that there's something that happens. I don't know how I could live with myself personally. But what I am hearing, what I would like to see for our next board meeting is how we plan on targeting perhaps those students that are at risk, which I think is really important. And then what we are able to do for our youngest learners, the kindergartners, the first graders, those that are entering school for the first time. If there is something that we can do for them that provides, and of course safely, but that does provide some kind of in-person contact, because I think that, let's face it. I mean, I know as a parent, the first day of school, first day of kindergarten, first day of it's a huge, huge deal. And, I think, and I know it's a lot to ask. It's placing a huge burden on all of you, but I think our kids are worth it for us to see what we can do for the youngest of our learners. So.
Right. We will get to work on that.
Scott, I have one more question.
Sure.
So if the vote is to go remote, at least at the beginning, last year we wound up paying for buses and other services that we weren't using but thought we would use later. My gut says if we start remote, we will end the year remote or come close to it. What is our plan? Have we thought of what the plan is for all the stuff that we may be paying for but won't actually be using? And do we have to pay for it?
Good question. As far as most things, we're under contract. There's a lot of things we'd have to continue with. As far as busing goes, Jordy and I have had some conversations about that we think we would use the bus at the beginning of the year, even under remote, to get kids back and forth to expanded learning, since we're offering that service. And then, I don't know, Jordy, do you know if we have, what would be our option if it goes long-term, longer than September 28th?
Yeah, so the initial plan is if what we're talking is going remote until September 28th, I think you're talking, the 5 or 6 weeks time frame. And the recommendation is we continue paying for a student like we did in the spring, because if we don't, there's a risk that we don't have drivers when we come back. So I don't think it's prudent that for just 5 weeks, it is in our budget, right? So for just 5 weeks to not pay for a student, we would have to evaluate how things are progressing. And the answer is yes, we can negotiate a reduction in what we pay. And if we're going to be like this all year, we can have a discussion about basically not paying. But I think that's a huge step that I think we can decide as we approach September 28th, not right now.
Okay.
I really do think we need to really revisit September 28th, because I do believe there will be nothing that will materially change September 28th. I think we can probably, most of us can agree that that's an arbitrary date. You said it was. If it's honestly, I've seen, I think Glenbrook 225 had said they are going virtual until further notice. So it's got to be some type of benchmark that parents can actually buy into that says, once the positivity rate is down to below 3% or whatever the right metric is, then that's when we will consider going live. We will give you 30 days notice. So once we see that trend, we will announce that, December 24th or, January 17th or whatever the date is. Or if there's miraculously a vaccine earlier than they think and enough people take it. I mean, all those types of things.
Katie's like, no.
Well, that's why I really struggle with not starting initially. I'm still struggling with that. But, at the end of the day, I'll support whatever the board decides. I certainly understand that there is a lot of discussion and a lot of different ways of looking at this. And my way may or may not be the right one, but it is what it is. It's my way. But I'm only one vote, right?
Well, I think everybody's struggling with it. There, but it's like really what's going to be the safest option for the long haul for us. We don't want to open up prematurely and then have a huge infestation of this across all our buildings, because we have families across multiple buildings here, and then bringing it home to elderly where there's multi-generations living there, and it's a really, really hard decision, and everybody is struggling with it, not just our district, but everybody is struggling with it. Which leads me to my question, Jordy. I was going to ask you, if we do end up starting remotely, does our breakfast and lunch pickup continue as it did over the summer? How is that going to work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the answer is yes, it continues. It's going to be a little different unless there is a waiver issued by the state. We can continue. We're going to continue serving meals in a drive-through format. We're going to centralize it at Gemini. It's going to be similar, meaning Monday and Wednesdays as well. The difference is going to be that we cannot just serve the meals to anybody in the household under the age of 18, which is what we've been doing now. We have to now serve them to our registered students. So the car would stop by and say, my student's name is so-and-so, goes to Nelson, and we would have a tablet that the Arbor staff would have in their hands with the software, our food service software, and they would look up the student name and give them the meal. So it's going to be a little bit slower, because there has to be that check. We are required to do that check, unless a waiver comes through that makes our lives easier.
Got it.
And Jordy, couldn't we pre-automate something where parents would log in and say, my child's at Nelson, I plan to pick up meals on Wednesday, so that we already kind of had a roster versus just figuring out sometimes it's 100 people, sometimes it's 1,000 to show up.
So in our food service subcommittee, actually, which Angie is part of, we've actually thought about that and had a discussion about creating a form that parents would fill out, and maybe even a week ahead of time, so that we have time to prepare all of this. However, after much discussion, Arbor has a pretty good idea based on now 3 years of history. And I have a pretty good idea of who is going to come and grab a meal, especially now that we have some students that are going to have to pay, some students that are going to be reduced. So they're still going to have to pay a little bit. And yes, we'll have students that are free, but we have a pretty good idea what that ratio is. The plan is to make more meals at the beginning. And if we have a little left over, that's fine. I'd rather have that. And then kind of calibrate as we go. So we thought the form was originally a good idea. We want to try to make it easy for parents. We want to try, this would be another thing they have to remember to do and look it up and do it. And so we thought it was adding unnecessary complications.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Dr. Clay, I just remembered one more thing, of course, to add to your list, and that's that date. If we are looking at going hybrid September 28th, then we need to establish, what's the drop dead date in order for us to make that decision so we can notify parents.
So, Walter, were you suggesting that we choose a later date, or were you?
Yeah, I feel like if the vote is to go hybrid, there is very little chance that anything would change by September 28th. I really feel like we're just giving people false hope, because then we're going to be going through this all over again with parents saying, well, why aren't you opening, etc. I would be honest and say until further notice, and I would maybe lay out a couple of metrics that say, case positivity, we think needs to be at 3.5%. Guidance from the CDC needs to change. But whatever, I don't know what those metrics are. I'll be honest, that I'm not sure any of us really do. But at least it gives parents the sense that they need to plan for a long-term at-home schooling versus, September 20th and September 28th comes, we say October 28th. It just feels like we're delaying the inevitable. Why do that? Other districts have already said, as I said, some are starting. Others have said, until further notice. I think Glenview 225 has said that for the high schools. They announced that back in June, I think. I've heard others doing that. Some have put dates out there. I just don't see a sense of putting a date out. I would rather say we will provide at least 30 days notice before we anticipate going live, or 45 days, whatever that right amount is.
Good question.
Has anybody heard of shorter than a quarter? Because I've heard districts, saying first quarter. I've heard them saying through winter break. I haven't seen anyone doing anything earlier. Has anybody else?
I don't know. I can't remember who it was, but I know there was at least one district was saying after Labor Day. They may have changed that since then, but yeah, Labor Day doesn't give you much time to do anything.
No.
I agree with Walter's point that giving false hope is just an emotional roller coaster for parents, and their planning is it's all screwed up. I think having some kind of metric baseline would be really helpful.
I agree with that. I think that, we do need to follow the data, the science. I'm a believer in that. I think that, I agree.
I agree with that also. I support that as well.
Change in the upper level winds. They're going to bring the flow from Canada.
I actually like that approach too. So that's great.
No cool spell, but just a nice, comfortable period of summer weather.
Whose TV is playing?
Oh, wait a minute. I'm sorry.
Anything interesting?
Gotta watch the news, Don't like to watch.
You're better off not some nights.
You're right.
I know.
It's on his back.
I'm with Crystal. It just stresses me out completely. But I'm a glutton. I continue watching it because I just have to know.
You want to know the weather forecast or anything? No.
That's. Any other comments, concerns, things that we haven't thought of? Which, of course, there probably are things we haven't thought of. This is like the inner monologue in my head that plays out on a daily basis. I talk to myself. It's like.
Sorry, I'm super talkative tonight, but I guess I had a question for Angie or maybe Dr. Clay. I know I have several friends who would probably be looking into expanded learning because they have to work. And they were wondering if it would be teachers that would be like, who would be the adults or people staffing and kind of helping the kids with their work? How would that work?
So most of our staff are not certified teachers. Some are in terms of after school programming. During the day, most of our certified teachers will be teaching remote learning. So the staff that will be working with the kids will be facilitating their remote learning will most likely be just dedicated youth professionals who have worked with kids and supported kids through youth development activities with expanded learning in the past. Most of our staff are returning, which is great. But the actual teaching would still happen remotely. It would be almost as if kind of a paraprofessional situation. Would probably be the best way to describe it. But it would be adult staff with students.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
There was a email that was sent out from Natasha Scott that said, I have 2 questions for the board meeting tonight. I cannot find the link on your website that you referred to submit questions. So I'm sending these questions in an email. With 6 feet social distancing, a school bus can only hold 10 students per trip. Will the district commit to putting a cap on the number of students on school buses at one time? And second, First Student has told their school bus drivers that they cannot wear masks while driving the bus for safety reasons. Is the district aware of this and in agreement?
First of all, the 50 limit actually comes from the state. That's what we were told. Correct, Jordy?
That's correct. That's the guideline. Yep.
Yep, the guideline is 50. So that's where that's coming from. And I agree that you can't fully social distance on a bus with 50 kids either. So no, we don't like that. But we do have a significant number of parents who are saying they wouldn't use the bus anyway. So our numbers may be even lower than that. And then the other part, remind me what that was, Sheila, a second. Oh, the mask. I've not heard that. Have you, Jordy?
So let me clarify. I attended a virtual presentation from First Student on all the safety protocols they are taking. They went into extreme detail on different types of sanitizing procedures, and they're focused on 2 different types. It was very extensive. In that presentation, they said that drivers would be required to wear masks unless there is a safety concern that arises because the driver is wearing a mask. For example, the driver wears glasses and the glasses are fogging while the driver is driving, and he or she is not able to fix that. So in those situations, they would allow the driver to take off their mask. I have not heard that they are requiring their drivers to not wear masks, but I will confirm that with them tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to share that I saw that email came in and that she was having difficulties.
Yeah, we'll respond. And again, I will clarify with First Student if what they said in the presentation has changed.
Alex, you're muted.
Sorry, Dr. Clay, I forwarded that email to you so that you know.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, the one thing, and I hate to, so we've talked about, are we doing, and I would love from Aaron Sterling, what are we doing for Okay, you know, the one thing, and I hate to, so we've talked about, are we doing, and I would love from Aaron Sterling, what are we doing for Okay, you know, the one thing, and I hate to, so we've talked about, are we doing, and I would love from Aaron Sterling, what are we doing for Okay, you know, the one thing, and I hate to, so we've talked about, are we doing, and I would love from Aaron Sterling, what are we doing for our English language learners? Are we doing anything?
Hi, good evening. Yes,
as we usually do?
So just as Jen Pacheco described, what we are planning on doing is within the remote learning, what we want to be sure is that we are going to definitely identify who our newcomers are and students who are low proficient. We want to be resources and tools and do the best that we can to support our language learners. So we definitely have been thinking about this, and it's clearly written out in our remote learning plan. And our teachers, like I described back at our June board meeting, went above and beyond to get a hold of all of our students who were not able to speak English. So we're going to do as much as we can as well to provide job aids for our job aids for students and or parents on how to log on and or even just be aware of the ever-changing landscape so that we are providing different resources and videos and such and providing them in multiple languages when we can. So
thank you.
Yeah.
And then I'm sorry, now I'm the talkative one here, Katie. And then lastly, because certainly at the school where I teach, we're very heavy on data and testing, where it seems like we're always testing our kids for, you know, all sorts of reasons. But if there is a concern during this remote learning period about language, seems like we're always testing our kids for, you know, all sorts of reasons. But if there is a concern during this remote learning period about language or possibly, you know, learning difficulties, what is our plan to do that remotely?
Jen Pacheco, you want to take that?
Sure. So the federal guidance is still in place. Our child find obligation is still there. We would try to, I think the first step with any student that comes up with a concern is we do try to follow that MTS process of providing interventions, taking progress monitoring data, looking at results, and then planning next steps. When it comes to a full-scale evaluation, it gets a little trickier because many of the protocols that are developed for evaluation are not developed to be done virtually. So depending on our phase, there are different things that we can do to continue that evaluation process, but we will have to look at different ways of completing those just to make sure we're following those federal guidelines.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, and I was just going to also add on to what Ms. as Ms. Pacheco said, our intervention model will continue to be in place virtually. So last year we implemented reading recovery. We also, our literacy specialists and interventionists also support students through small group, push in and pull out instruction. That will continue, and that will be a piece.
Thank you.
I have another question. So in the spring, the remote learning had a little bit of flexibility for families. So like for me, for example, I have a younger child, nap time, I could actually really help. I know people that work till like 3 p.m. and they could come home and they could really sit with a child that might need that extra help. Or me, for example, you know, I could do it better during nap time or whatever. That is what I'm asking. Is there some flexibility that can be built in for families that may have a little more trouble at particular times?
Sure. There are kind of two answers to that. First of all, one of the big guidelines, but the other piece is Mr. Schaefer has been working on how we do record those sessions and then make them available to students. So that's been a big priority for us so that there is more flexibility. And so Mr. Schaefer feels pretty confident that we'll be able to have that ready to go in the fall. So the long answer to your question is yes. We feel pretty confident that we'll be able to make that work.
Thank you.
Anything else? Okay, so Dr. Clay, because it seems like the presentation you gave us at the beginning of this meeting was a lifetime ago because we've talked about so many different things. Can you just please recap for us what the next steps are?
Okay, so the next steps are to open up the lines of communication with parents about what the proposal was tonight, and so that they can submit their questions on August 6th. There will be my response to those questions through a recorded session of me talking about them will be released. It'll be available on our website for them to get those responses. And then we'll just continue to develop the plan, assuming you approve this on August 6th. And in the meantime, we'll work on some of the changes that we discussed tonight.
Okay.
Can those questions be released on the 5th so that parents can hear the answers to that prior to the board meeting? Is that possible? You said the 6th.
Did I get the date right?
I don't know.
Janet? Janet Bishop, is that the right date, August 6th?
I thought you said the 4th.
It's the 5th in your plan. We had hoped to release it on August 5th. So that would
okay. All right.
Okay. Yes. Thank you.
The day before the meeting. Yes, Katie.
Okay, good.
So just to confirm too, is part of your planning or in the changes that we've talked about, is part of that to consider an extension to the start date?
Yeah, we were talking about going with until further notice.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments, anecdotes? No? Okay. Well, thank you all for this very thoughtful discussion. I know this is not easy on anyone, but again, I just want to thank everyone for their hard work. And I know that everyone has the best interest of our students and our staff. So for that, I thank you. And I know I say this all the time, but I mean it all the time. You are all the reason that I'm so proud to be associated with this district. So thank you. So if there is nothing else, could I please have a motion to adjourn our meeting?
Mr. Gluskin?
Yes.
Ms. Urban?
Yes.
Mr. Simmons?
Yes.
Ms. Brooke?
Yes.
And Ms. Ketchkowski?
Yes.
And we are adjourned. Thank you again very much. Our regular meeting, next business meeting, is on Thursday, August 6th at 7 p.m. Thank you all. Have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.